Hi, Hilliard fifth graders. My name is Letty Shamp, and I'm the Deputy City Engineer with the City of Hilliard. I'm here today working from home. I hope all of you are doing well, finishing up your 2019 through 2020 school year at home. I'm hoping that my presentation here today will be a little bit of diversion from some of your normal classwork. I'm here to talk to you about pedestrian safety in the City of Hilliard. I'm going to go ahead and share out my screen here and we'll get started on the presentation. All right, so I started doing this program back in 2008 when my daughter was a student at Hoffman Trails Elementary. I was prompted to do this by her then third grade teacher, Renee Hammersmith. In my job with the City of Hilliard, I regularly try to tackle traffic safety issues through engineering. So trying to improve street designs to make them safer, to make crosswalks safer, build more sidewalks and trails and things like that. I live in Hilliard too, and I strongly believe that a community where people are out of their cars, walking around, is a healthy, more vibrant, fun place to live. So as I would walk around and ride my bike with my daughter here in Hilliard, I would talk to her about things to look out for with respect to crosswalks and cars and those interactions. But I knew that not all kids had similar opportunities. Hilliard is a growing community. That means that some of the streets here are busy and some parents may not feel like it's safe for their kids to walk or bike to school or down the street to get ice cream. But if kids are never given the opportunity to walk and bike around, they never learn some really important skills. So Mrs. Hammersmith encouraged me to develop an educational safety program targeted at fifth graders because you guys are the ones that are starting to spread your wings and you're given a little bit more freedom by your parents. So for about a decade, I would go into Hoffman Trails once a year and talk about pedestrian safety with their fifth grade team. Then a few years ago, Mrs. Hammersmith experienced something that no parent should ever have to go through. She lost her son, Justin, to a drug overdose. This was absolutely devastating, as you can imagine. In her incredible sadness, I remember her saying to me, "We need to get kids while they are young to teach them that their choices have consequences. We need to teach students better skills so that they can tackle the challenges ahead of them in their teen and young adult years." So through Mrs. Hammersmith's grief and healing process, she wanted to honor her son, Justin, and make something good come out of this horrible experience. And so the program, Just in Case, was born. Just in Case is a program that Mrs. Hammersmith teaches at Hoffman Trails. The theme of the program is always wear the right shoes because Justin loves shoes. Just in Case focuses on teaching students your age about making smart choices, being an independent thinker, and developing the skills to choose the right shoes in all kinds of different situations that you might encounter in sixth grade, in middle school, high school, and beyond. Just in Case helps students be prepared for life's challenges just in case a situation comes up and you need some help. So this program is about pedestrian safety, and it really meshes well with the lessons that Mrs. Hammersmith is teaching in the Just in Case program, and I'm really honored to be part of it. So I'm here today to share some important lessons so that each of you can be out and about enjoying this great Hilliard community by walking and biking and to be safe while doing so. All right, so we're going to start at the beginning. What is a pedestrian? Sometimes I assume that fifth graders know this, but that may not necessarily be the case. So a pedestrian is anyone walking on foot. So top left, obviously some kids walking on the sidewalk. It also includes people walking with pets and joggers. In the photo in the top right, you can see that there's somebody in a wheelchair, a mobility device. They are also considered a pedestrian, even though they're on a wheeled vehicle. But what about in the bottom right corner, that person riding their bicycle? Is that person considered a pedestrian? So is a bicyclist a pedestrian? Well, no, not really. Sometimes some of the rules for pedestrians apply to bicycles, but usually not. They're a little different, and bicyclists can come in all different shapes and sizes. You might have the very beginner cyclists, like the ones on the top left picture, where there's some kids riding on the sidewalk with their mom. And then on the top right, you've got a mixed age group there that's probably pretty skilled. They're riding in the street as a little bit busier street. And then there's folks that ride on trails. And then at the bottom right corner picture, we're going to talk a little bit more about this later, is that interaction where pedestrians and bicyclists may be walking in or moving through the crosswalk at the same time. So you're probably thinking, gosh, guy, I'm a fifth grader. I've been walking and biking around the neighborhood and in parks for years. Why are we talking about this now? Well, we're talking about this now is because as you get older, you start getting around some busier street situations. And so it's not the same as riding in your neighborhood or in a park. I'm going to give a little analogy here. So most of you have probably been in a baby pool, and maybe you've been at a pool at the Hilliard Municipal Park or the East Pool where there's a baby pool. So you're probably all very comfortable. You've done this before. But maybe some of you have not gone off the diving board or the high dive. Might be kind of scary. Some of you maybe have, but I can almost guarantee that you didn't go immediately from the baby pool up to the high dive. You took some steps along the way to kind of master that high dive. So you may have started in the baby pool. Perhaps you had swimming lessons or diving lessons. And so then in a process, you made it to the high dive. So it's kind of similar to walking and biking. So here's an aerial photograph of Hoffman Trails Elementary School in the Hoffman Farms neighborhood that's right next to Hilliard Darby High School and Heritage Middle School and the Hilliard Municipal Park. So walking and biking in the neighborhood is kind of like being in that baby pool. Yes, sometimes obviously you don't want to drown yourself, but for the most part, it's fairly easy. But then you compare that to walking and biking along, say, Leopard Road or Scioto Darby Road, where there's a lot more traffic. It feels a little bit more like that high dive. And then you bring in school arrival and dismissal, and it's a little bit crazy. So one thing that kind of wanted to share here that's kind of a paradox, the school traffic paradox, I call it. So this is a picture of a mom and a dad with their kid, and it says there's too much traffic for Billy to walk to school, so we drive him. But then that creates more traffic around the schools. So as more and more parents feel uncomfortable with their kids walking or biking, they drive them, but then that just contributes to more traffic around the schools. So you really have to know a lot more what to look out for. So the goal of this program is to teach the steps to mastering these more complex traffic situations safely. So, and to compare walking and biking in a neighborhood versus walking and biking along a busy street. They're completely different. So the first thing I'm going to do is walk through pedestrian crash stats. So this is a look back for the last 3 years from 2017, 18, and 19. In that period of time in Hilliard, we had 19 total crashes. In 2017, there were 9. Then we had a nice dip, thankfully, in 2008. And unfortunately, in 2019, we had 7. So kind of spiked back up. Sadly, 2 of those crashes were fatal. 17 of them were injury crashes. So in every single one of them, that person or a family was impacted in a pretty significant way. And one thing to note here is that 18 of those 19 crashes were along the arterial streets, so the busier streets. Only 1 was in a neighborhood. And what's unique about those arterial streets are the speed limits are usually 35 and in some cases 45. Now here are the bicycle crash stats from the same time period. There were 22. And again, you look at that spike up in 2019, so that's a little bit bothersome. Luckily, there were no fatal crashes, but 21 of the 22 were injury crashes. And again, same theme along those busier streets where the speed limits are 35 miles an hour and up, That's where most of these crashes are happening. So why is speed so important? It's critically important. If you are hit by a vehicle traveling at 20 miles per hour, 9 out of 10 pedestrians, you have a 90% chance of surviving that crash. So that's pretty good. You raise a vehicle speed up just 10 miles per hour to 30. If you're hit by a car going 30 miles per hour, you only have a 50% chance of surviving. And you can imagine if that speed goes up to 40, you have a very small chance of surviving that crash. So this is why it's so important that drivers drive 20 miles per hour in school zones. So when school children are coming and going, the speed limit changes to 20 miles an hour. And it's really important that drivers drive that speed because the safety of the students walking around is so important. So something to think about here, drivers actually can see a lot more when they're driving at slower speeds. In the left-hand side over here, you can see when you're driving slower, you can see the whole road, the things going on along the side of the road. But as you drive faster, that cone of vision really narrows up. So think about this over here at 40 miles per hour. As a driver, you may not even see somebody, a pedestrian, standing along the side of the road or on the sidewalks. So that really impacts safety in our communities, again, when we're talking about the arterial streets. Another thing to think about is as a driver, you cannot stop as fast or stop as quickly when you're driving at a faster speed. So the amount of time, if you think about it, if something pops up in the roadway, whether it's a car stops or a pedestrian or bicyclist, is out in the street, two things happen for a driver. They have to recognize that there's something there. So that's that thinking distance. Oh gosh, I need to stop. And then it's the braking distance. So they put their foot on the brake and they start to push the brake to stop the car. But look at the difference here between a car going 20 miles per hour. They can stop pretty quickly. It only takes about 40 feet or 3 car lengths to stop. But if you're going 40 miles per hour, it takes 3 times that distance to actually stop your car. So here's kind of a cool video. It actually was made in Australia, so you'll notice a really cool accent. And they also talk about kilometers per hour. So in the United States, we measure speed by miles per hour. In Australia, they use the metric system and they talk about kilometers per hour or Ks. So that's the one difference. So this is kind of a cool video, kind of gives an example of what we're talking here about stopping sight distance and why it's so important.
What you're about to see will change your mind about speeding. 2 identical cars, one travelling at 60, the other at 65. A sudden change in the road ahead, and both drivers first react, and then, a moment later, they brake. And things start to get interesting. Down here, the difference is extraordinary. In the last 5 metres of braking, you wipe off half your speed. So this car is still doing 32 Ks when it hits. This one also hits, but only at 5 Ks. So no matter how good a driver you are, 5 Ks difference up there makes 27 Ks difference down here.
So think about that example, guys. In that case, it was a truck that pulled out. But think about if that was a pedestrian, the difference that would make in terms of safety. And we talked about the chance of survival. So that's why it is so important that additional 5 miles per hour does make a difference. So, okay, you're probably thinking, I'm a 5th grader. I don't drive. So why should I care about this car stuff? Well, it is important because you need to understand your new surroundings as you start going out of your neighborhood and along busier streets. And you need to understand why and how the things that you do can keep you safe. And also, I think you guys have a great opportunity to teach your parents that speed matters. A lot of us parents, we get busy and we're in a hurry. And we don't think much about going 5 miles an hour over the speed limit. But you can share this, this information and let them know that it really is important, especially when you think about pedestrian safety. All right, so these signs are crosswalk signs. You've probably seen them around. The one on the left indicates a trail crossing where there might be bikes or pedestrians present. The one in the middle is the type of crosswalk sign you'd see in a school zone. And the one on the right is another type of a crosswalk warning sign, and it also includes a flashing beacon underneath it. So why cross at a crosswalk? The most important reason is you have the right of way as a pedestrian in the crosswalk. So right of way, what does that mean? That means you have the legal right to continue along that path. You have the legal right to be there. But the reason I want to show you here that word in. So as a pedestrian in Ohio, the state law says that you have the right of way in the crosswalk, but it does not say that you have the right of way at the crosswalk. So if you're standing there waiting to cross, a car technically does not have the legal responsibility to yield to you, but once you put your foot in that crosswalk, then they do. So it seems a little ridiculous. And actually right now there is a bill going through the Ohio legislature to change that word in to at and some other things, but basically saying that, you know, that drivers should have a responsibility to yield to pedestrians at that crosswalk. Pedestrians should not have to put their lives in danger by putting their foot in the crosswalk for a car to yield to them. So, so the other thing is you're more likely to be expected and seen by drivers if you're crossing at those crosswalks. And you're also more likely to have drivers yield to you if you're crossing at a crosswalk. But does this guarantee your safety? Absolutely not. I'm going to do a breakdown here of some of the pedestrian and bicycle crashes that we've had in Hilliard. And really, they're very similar across the United States. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what things can go wrong and things to watch out for. And you'll notice a lot of these crashes that have happened at crosswalks. So that's why you should never just assume that you have safety because that you're safe because you're crossing at a crosswalk. All right, so here's a signalized intersection. This is actually a picture near Tharp 6th grade school. It's the intersection of Davidson Road and Leap Road near the Britton Farms neighborhood. I call this one the walking blind man slam because what happens here at these signalized crossings a lot is that pedestrians are hit from behind and they don't even see a car coming. And so I'm here to tell you things to look out for when you're crossing. So usually you push a button and you wait, and then up comes the walk signal. And when that happens, vehicular traffic also has a green light. So as you're starting to cross the street, there are things you have to look out for. Because you could have a car turning right on the green light, like that car pulling out of Britton Farms. You could have a car turning left on the green light. And something to think about is lots of times these cars, they're not intentionally trying to hit the pedestrians in the crosswalks, but they're looking at traffic coming towards them or finding gaps in traffic, and they may not even notice pedestrians crossing off to the side. You also have a situation where if you continue across that crosswalk, a right turn on red, they're supposed to come to a complete stop, but I've seen many drivers that kind of roll through the crosswalk. And sometimes pedestrians are blocked by cars that are already stopped at the traffic signal. So again, the cars don't even see the pedestrians. They're concentrating on other things and not on you. So real quick, just so you know, the signal indications on those pedestrian signal heads, the walking man is the indication for walk. It actually means start to walk across the street. That's when if you have not left the curb already, you can start crossing. In the middle, the flashing don't walk. And some of our traffic signals in Hilliard, it comes with a countdown pedestrian indication, so you know how many seconds are left. That's called the clearance interval. That is the time for you to continue to cross. So once you've left the curb and you started to cross the crosswalk, you could continue crossing. There should be plenty of time for you to walk across. You don't necessarily need to run. Now, if it's a solid hand raised up, that means don't walk. So if you have not started crossing, you should not leave the curb. So here is an uncontrolled crosswalk. So here's a situation where you have a stop condition on the side street and the main road going up and down on the screen does not have a stop, but there's a crosswalk marked across here. This is actually at Laura Lane and Leopard Road across from Hilliard Darby High School in the Hoffman Farms neighborhood. Now I called this one the dark out dash because there was a crash that happened here a couple years ago where a student was walking to school in the morning and it was dark. And as you can see, so she was standing over here getting ready to walk to school. And it's kind of a wide crosswalk because of just the way the design of the streets were. So it's about 50 feet to cross. So when she started crossing, she presumably thought she had plenty of time to cross. But then what had happened when she got almost to the edge, there was another car coming north on Leopard Road and ran into her. Now, luckily, she was okay. She was injured, but she wasn't severely injured. But what the driver said is, I didn't even see the student. So, and obviously, the student didn't cross the street intending to get hit. So something happened there where the student was not paying attention, didn't see the car coming, either or misjudged. So something to think about when you're crossing in an uncontrolled crosswalk, you need to judge how fast approaching cars are coming and how long of a distance you need to cross. Now, I know this is hard sometimes when you're a young person because you may not have that skill set to really be able to make those judgment calls, but you need to always keep your eye on the cars. You need to think about, can they see you? And if it's dark out, you need to pay extra special attention because the cars may not see you. Next uncontrolled crosswalk type this is actually across from Heritage Middle School near the Sunrise Academy in the park entrance. So we had a situation where there was a student getting ready to cross the street. And at the same time, there was a car opposite them that was waiting to turn left to come out of the driveway. So in this picture, there's not a ton of traffic, so it seems like it would be an easy enough thing to do. But this was at school arrival time, so there was lots of cars. So if you got to think about this, the driver is looking left, looking right, looking left, looking right, trying to find a gap in traffic. The pedestrian's kind of doing the same thing. And then as soon as there's a gap, boom, they both go off at the same time. And the pedestrian was hit. The student was hit. Again, thankfully not hurt badly, but was injured. But that's something to think about. So when you're trying to find a gap in traffic across a street as a busy street or a driveway, you need to pay attention to cars that may be trying to do the exact same thing that you are doing and try to make eye contact with them and make sure that they see you. You shouldn't assume that you have safety just when you get in that crosswalk. All right, so this next one I'm going to talk about, this is some of the most important things that I have to say here today. So I hope everybody is paying attention. If you need to stand up, move around, I need you to be paying attention to this. So this is called the multiple threat thrashing. Here's a situation. We had two individuals that were crossing Main Street or Hilliard Rome Road near the Jimmy John's. Okay, so that's 5 lanes of traffic to cross. And they were crossing in the crosswalk that was marked. So the first 2 cars that were heading in the northbound direction, they stopped for the pedestrians. So they started off into the middle, stood there in the middle. A car was coming in the lane next to them, and that car stopped for them. So they started the rest of the way across. But then there was a car driving too fast that came in that curb lane, didn't even see them, and there was a fatal crash right there. Absolutely tragic. So the most important thing to remember, when you cross multiple lanes, you have to check all the lanes. You should never fall for, I call it the wave or the death wave. If a car stops and waves you on, don't assume that it's safe. You should always check both lanes. Don't ever assume just because someone has waved you on that it's clear to go. Okay, so here's another picture of that multiple threat situation. It shows a pedestrian crossing at the crosswalk. The first car, car A, stops to let the pedestrian cross. They block the sight lines. So the second car doesn't stop and doesn't even see the pedestrian and sometimes hits that pedestrian at a high speed. And remember what we talked about? the chances of survival when you're hit by a car going fast, especially if they don't see you and they didn't even brake, it is tragic. So the most important lesson I have to tell you guys here today is always check both lanes when you're crossing more than one lane of traffic coming in the same direction. So bicycling, I love to ride my bike around town. It's fast and fun. You can get places quicker. You can go farther. It's a lot of fun, but it does come with some greater risks. So something to think about here. I'm going to give you kind of an Ohio law highlights. The Ohio laws that cover bike and pedestrian laws is tons and tons of pages. So this is just kind of a Cliff Notes version, because I know sometimes kids are very interested in, well, can I do this? Is it legal to do this? That sort of thing. So pedestrians. Pedestrians have the right of way in all crosswalks. Again, we talked about the whole in thing. One thing that people don't realize is that the intersection of every public street is a legal crosswalk, whether marked or unmarked. So even if there is not a markings on the ground or on the street, or there's no signs, it is legal to cross there. And pedestrians have the legal right of way. The cars are supposed to yield to them, but most people don't know that. Another thing that's really important is a pedestrian cannot dart or suddenly leave the curb. That's really important because, to be fair to drivers, if you just run out really fast, how would they have time to be able to, again, see you there, identify that you're in the road, press the brake, and get stopped? So pedestrians do have a legal responsibility to dart. You cannot run across the street. There's also common misperception about jaywalking. So a lot of people think that it is illegal to cross the street anywhere but at a crosswalk, and that is not true. Jaywalking is very specific, and it tends to be more applicable in downtown urban areas where you have traffic signals at every single public street intersection. In that case, it is illegal or jaywalking to cross not at those traffic signals, okay? But again, in suburbia, in our area, there's a lot of places where there are public streets where it's not all the intersections are signalized. So you are permitted to cross mid-block, but you may not have the right of way. So that's the key difference here. So for instance, if you're going to Old Hilliard and you're going to go to Witt's to get some ice cream, and you drive there with your family, and you park on one side of the street because there's on-street parking there, you get out of your car and you want to walk straight across the street to go to Witt's. So it is legal to do that. You do not have to go to the next intersection up or to a crosswalk to actual cross. But what's different is you don't have the right of way. So if there was a crash between a car and a pedestrian, the pedestrian would be at fault, okay? But you can legally cross there. You're not going to get a ticket for crossing there. And but you just need to make sure you understand that the cars have the right to be there, not you first, okay? All right, so let's move on to bicycles. A little bit different. Ohio law treats a bicycle riding in the street as a vehicle. So that means that if you're riding your bike in the street, you have to follow all the vehicle laws. So stopping, yielding to pedestrians at crosswalks, that sort of thing. It also says that bicycles shall not ride without due regard for safety and rights of pedestrians and drivers. So that means, you can't ride recklessly, whether you're on a sidewalk or in the street, and you can't dart. So if you think about the speed at which bicycles travel, and if you're crossing streets, you need to be going slower, because otherwise, if you leave that curb quickly, it's almost as if you're a pedestrian darting, okay? So talk a little bit about bicycles on sidewalks, paths, and trails. That varies by local jurisdiction. There are some jurisdictions that say bicycles are not allowed or it's illegal to ride on sidewalks. That's not the case in Hilliard. But you really do need to watch out for your speed, watch out for conflicts at driveways, and that whole darting issue. Because a pedestrian moving on a sidewalk is going a lot slower than what a bicycle would be. So here's one key thing. The right of way for bicyclists at crosswalks is very vague in the Ohio Revised Code or in Ohio law. So what this means, and I'll talk a little bit about this, is you need to be really careful crossing streets riding your bike. Okay, and I'm going to show you an example here shortly of why that's so important. Another thing you should know, if you're out riding to school in the mornings, it might be dawn, but basically dusk to dawn. If you're riding your bicycle, you're required to have a light on the front and reflectors on your bike. All right, so here's a driveway crossing. This is actually near Hilliard Station 6th grade school. As you can see, there's a trail on the left side of the road, and bicycles. Lots of times you'll see bicycles riding along this trail, and they're getting ready to cross a school driveway. And there's a car that's coming up on that school drive, and they have to stop. Okay, there's a stop sign there for them. But they want to make a right-hand turn. And when you're making a right-hand turn, lots of times you're looking to your left to find a gap in traffic because you don't really care about traffic going the other direction because you're turning right. And what is very common, there are a lot of crashes that happen like this. Luckily, they're slow speed. But if a bicyclist is coming fast, approaching that crosswalk, and the driver is looking left and the bicyclist is coming from the right, boom, that's where the crash happens. And again, luckily, those are typically low speed, but still that can be prevented if cyclists are paying a little bit more attention when they're crossing driveways, and that drivers, when you're coming up to a trail, a shared use path, a sidewalk, that you're thinking about stopping before you enter that crosswalk. But again, when you're riding a bike on a trail, watch your speed, especially when you're approaching those driveways. Cars may not be expecting a fast-moving cyclist, especially if they're approaching from their right side. All right, I'm going to go back to this multiple threat thrashing. Take two, same situation, bike versus a pedestrian. Is there a difference? Yes, there is. So bike is waiting to cross that same intersection. Two cars stop for them. A bike starts across quickly, so at a much faster pace than a pedestrian would. Luckily, the first car sees that bike and stops, but the second car, as they continue on, did not see that bicyclist, hit the bicyclist, knock him off their bike. Luckily, the bicyclist was not hurt badly, but here's the difference. The right-of-way rules in Ohio for bikes in crosswalks are really very vague. And when you think about a bicycle crossing a crosswalk on their bike much faster, it could be construed as darting, like leaving the curb very quickly. So a car may not have even had the opportunity to see that bicyclist. So rules of thumb on bike rules. A bicyclist should behave as a pedestrian when riding on pedestrian facilities. So if you're on your bike and you're on a sidewalk or you're on a path, you need to be going a little bit slower. You need to yield the right of way to pedestrians. And basically, don't be a jerk when you ride your bicycle. Slow down when you're around pedestrians and announce when you're passing, politely. Also, when you're crossing in a crosswalk, the pedestrian right-of-way laws only apply to bicyclists if you dismount and walk your bike across the street. Now, I know that this is not, a lot of people aren't going to do this. And if there aren't very many cars around and, you can do it safely, then, I guess I would be lying if I'd say that I got off and crossed my bike on foot at every crosswalk. But you do need to know that you may not have the right of way. It just sort of depends on the situation. And if you are riding your bike quickly across that crosswalk and it could be construed as darting, you may be at fault if there's a crash on a bike. All right, so crossing about roundabouts. I love roundabouts. We're starting to build a lot of them in the city of Hilliard and in other areas around central Ohio because of their safety benefits. The key difference between roundabouts and traditional signalized intersections is vehicles are going significantly slower because of the way they're designed. From a pedestrian standpoint, pedestrians only have to cross traffic coming from one direction at a time. That's pretty important because when you think about those uncontrolled crossings, you're constantly looking left, right, left to find a gap in traffic, or even at a signalized intersection, cars could be coming from behind you and you may not even see them. So at roundabouts, you're only crossing one direction at a time, and the crosswalks are directly in front of the drivers rather than off to their side. So those are the things that are different. The things that are the same is, typically the roundabouts aren't put in unless it's kind of a busier intersection. So obviously there's going to be more traffic and more to watch out for. So let me walk you through roundabout crosswalks. This is the busy roundabout at Main Street and Cemetery Road near the Donatos and the Walgreens. So again, you can see there are two crosswalks. They're much narrower, so there are shorter distances to cross for pedestrians. And here's how it works. Pedestrians on one side, they want to cross to the middle splitter island or the median, and the cars that are coming towards them, they need to yield to the pedestrian, and the pedestrian crosses to the middle. That's considered pedestrian refuge. And then they're going to cross the exiting lanes. And this is a little bit tougher because there are cars coming from multiple directions. So as you're trying to cross there, you got to look for cars that are coming out of the roundabout in the left lane, they're coming through the right lane, and also cars that might be turning right. So it's definitely a little bit more complicated to cross those exiting lanes. There's more to look for. But in this case, some of our roundabouts have a little bit of extra space, so it gives pedestrians a little bit more time to make those decisions. I'm going to show you a video here. This was taken from some cameras at Main and Cemetery. This was a couple years ago in 2017 when Hilliard Station was still at the building at the corner across from the Dairy Queen and the Jiffy Lube. And so you can see in the top left, it's school dismissal time. So there's tons of cars over there, parents waiting in line to pick up their kids. And actually, if you look over here on the right-hand side of the screen, there's a mom who's actually, I think she's probably the smart mom. She's waiting to pick up her kid in the Walgreens parking lot, so she doesn't have to get into that mess. But I'm going to play this video for the most part. So you're only going to see pedestrians in this video. And everybody, both cars and pedestrians, for the most part, do a pretty good job. So I'll let you watch this. So first you can see there's a pedestrian waiting to cross on the left-hand side to the middle. Again, it's pretty easy crossing those entry lanes. You'll see the exiting lanes, a little bit tougher. This is a young pedestrian, probably a sixth grader. Not little unsure of when it is okay to cross. He kind of starts off and then he pauses, and luckily the car yields to him. See some more students coming from the north, and they're going to be coming over this direction and crossing at the crosswalk on the right-hand side of your screen. This is real time, so this was not slowed down. So the speed of the pedestrians is actual walking speed. The speed of the cars is actual driving speed of cars. But you look, once the kids get up there to the crosswalk, thankfully the cars stop really far back, which is great. Car in the other lane stops, so now they're getting ready to cross to in the median. There's also some students over here on the left side that are crossing as well. But luckily those cars over here on the exiting lanes of the roundabout, they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. So yeah, pretty much good behavior here. So obviously there's a lot of traffic here, but for the most part, everybody's going fairly slow. And I think it shows that, roundabouts do have a lot of benefits, but there are also things that, adults and children need to look out for. All right, so the next video that I have is, let's see here, get this going. So, hang on a second here. Let's get to the next video. Okay, so this is a continuation. This is, in this video, you're going to see some bicyclists. You're going to see the big difference between pedestrians crossing versus bicycles crossing, okay? So you can see up here, there are a couple bicycles coming around on the sidewalk, and they're obviously going at a much faster speed than the pedestrians. Luckily, here comes another cyclist over here, and he gets out in the street pretty quickly, and that car right there has to brake pretty fast. So that may be considered darting. I think this is the case. Watch, this girl is crossing, and somebody has already stopped for her, and she's passed, and they're getting ready to go, and boom, that bicyclist was just darted out into the street. And luckily, again, the cars were going very slow, so nothing bad happened. But those are the kind of situations that you really need to watch out for as a bicyclist when you're crossing in crosswalks. It doesn't just apply to roundabouts. It could be anywhere. So hopefully that's a good visual display that kind of helps you understand some of those differences between bicycles and pedestrians. All right, so why the speed humps at the roundabouts on Main Street and Cemetery Road? So some of you may have realized in 2019, we installed speed humps or raised crosswalks at that roundabout. The reason those were put in is because speed absolutely matters, especially in school zones, to improve the safety for kids, our most vulnerable travelers. It's really important that we keep our speeds down. So that was our goal with that, and we did achieve that. So we actually collected speed data before we put the raised crosswalks in and then after to show what the differences were in speed. So these were the speeds that were taken in 2017 before the raised crosswalks were in. And really, for the most part, they were fairly slow. I mean, there are some situations, these numbers, some of them are at crosswalks and some are at the entries and some are circulating. But, you know, our key is we want the speeds at crosswalks to be about 20, maybe 22 miles per hour. And as you can see, some of them were a little bit higher. And that's why we put the raised crosswalks in. We're trying to get those speeds, particularly at the crosswalks, down. So in 2019, these are our speeds. So let me actually go to the next slide. It'll show the difference in speed. So the change in speed before and after the raised crosswalks. Look at all those negative numbers, and some of them are significant. Cars are going almost 9 miles an hour or more slower with the raised crosswalks. So we know that sometimes those raised crosswalks are not the most popular thing. Some drivers don't like them because they have to slow down. But that's exactly the point. We want drivers to slow down, particularly in these areas where there's lots of traffic and lots of students crossing the street. So I've gone through a lot of information here, a lot of different crosswalk scenarios. So as a student, you know, what's the best way to know what to look out for when crossing at all different types of crosswalks? The best way is to go out and practice. You will never know what it's like until you actually go out there and practice it. So you need to know, how long does it take to get across various lanes of traffic? How fast is traffic approaching? How do you learn to judge that? Do I have time to cross? Those are all things that you're never going to learn by sitting here at a presentation in school. You actually have to get out and do it. So I strongly encourage you, while some of the stuff is fresh in your minds, and if it's a nice day, go out with your parents and start tackling some of these situations with them so that you can become a little bit more confident and your parents are more confident of what you know. So one thing I do want to talk a little bit about here are the magical powers of pedestrians. So I want you guys to learn to be a superhero on the streets, a superhero pedestrian. And superheroes are people that can make amazing things happen. And I often say that I have magical powers because when I'm out walking and biking, especially walking, I can almost always get cars to yield to me because of the body language that I display and what I'm doing and how I'm acting at crosswalks. So body language absolutely matters. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Goldilocks principles of crosswalks. I'm assuming most of you know of Goldilocks. The porridge was too hot, too cold, just right. So picture on the left is a situation where you have, two girls. They're probably trying to cross the street a little too passively. Now this picture probably isn't fair because there's a crossing guard up there, and so they're standing back waiting for the crossing guard. But you will lots of times see adults and kids, but particularly kids, they're kind of standing near a crosswalk, but as a driver, you're not really sure. Are they trying to cross? They're talking to their friends, they're on their phone, whatever. So it's really unclear. So don't be too passive. On the other hand, don't be Buddy the Elf. You should not be an aggressive pedestrian and dart out or jump out as Buddy did. So don't be too aggressive, but you kind of want to be just right. You look at the girl on the right. She's stepped up to the curb, and look where she is looking. Eye contact with drivers is absolutely critical in terms of your safety because most drivers want to do the right thing. And if you are looking right at them, they are much more likely to acknowledge you, see that you're there, and yield to you. Okay? So you want to be the girl on the right hand where you're looking like you want to cross the street. You're up at the curb and you're making eye contact. So driver behavior and yielding. We all know there are jerk drivers out there, those that don't want to stop for anything. And we all know there are nice drivers out there. So how do you, as a kid, increase the probability that both jerks and nice people will yield to you? Well, you need to do some of the things we've been talking about here, about being responsible, standing up at the curb, making eye contact, paying attention, those sort of things. So, bottom line, it takes personal responsibility, so of both the driver and the pedestrian. So we're counting on both the drivers and the pedestrians and bicycles to do the right thing. But also as the city, so I work for the city, we have a responsibility to create the right environment. So to kind of foster that feeling that pedestrians matter along our streets. And we have been very much trying to do this over the last, I'd say, decade or more, really trying to make some improvements along the streets to foster a better sense of community, pedestrian safety, and helping with those right-of-way rules. So there's lots of different options for crosswalk improvements. You've probably seen a lot of them. Some of them are just, high visibility crosswalks, like with signs and pavement markings. We have some flashing beacons at some locations. Those medians, we talked a lot about those. Those are really helpful in terms of giving pedestrians refuge so they only have to cross one direction of traffic at a time, and also roundabouts slowing speed. So the goals here is we really want to slow down traffic because we know that increases safety, and it also increases the likelihood that drivers are going to yield to pedestrians if they're driving slower. We want to make the crossings more visible, make them simpler, because bottom line is we want more pedestrians and bicycles out along the streets, and we want fewer cars because it reduces congestion, it makes the air quality better, and it just basically makes our Hilliard community much more livable and fun when there are more pedestrian and bicycles out. But there is no one-size-fits-all approach. It's not like, every location we're going to put flashing beacons in or roundabouts in or medians. It's very much a case-by-case basis. But what I can tell you in the city of Hilliard is we're definitely prioritizing school zones, mixed-use areas, or high-speed and high-crash locations. So, we're certainly not going to go into a neighborhood where speeds are typically slower, and we don't have a lot of problems and invest and put, lots of flashing beacons and that sort of thing in. But we're really trying to focus on those high-crash corridors and the areas where we have more vulnerable road users out and about. Here's an example. This is an improvement that was done a couple years ago on crosswalk improvements on Leopard Road near Hilliard Darby High School. You can see on the left, that's what it looked like before. So there were marked crosswalks, but it was uncontrolled. You can see, again, this is the crosswalk that was like 50 foot wide. Look on the right, they were narrowed up quite a bit. One thing we also did here is we put this median in. This is actually the place where we want students to cross because it's simpler and it's safer. Here's a picture of it looking head on, and you can see there are the flashing beacons and there's a button there. Please push the button. I wanted to take this opportunity. Lots of times people don't want to push the button, and adults are probably the most guilty of this. Even during coronavirus, you can push the button with your elbow, okay? So the reason why that's important, you're not inconveniencing people by pushing the button. What you're doing is you're alerting people, drivers that are farther back, that, hey, you need to slow down. Somebody's up here crossing the street. If you don't push that button, let's say you're crossing multiple lanes and you don't push the button and the first car stops for you, how does the car in the other lane know that you're crossing if they're a little further back if you don't push that button? So I beg you, please, we put these buttons in so that you can alert drivers and that your safety is increased. So please use the buttons, okay? And then as you can see in the background of this picture, again, it's legal to cross back here. It's an intersection, so it is a legal crossing. So that's why we stripe those crosswalks. But it's really not as easy and safe as it is to cross here where the median is and where the flashing lights are. So that's why we always encourage you to use those protected crossings a little bit more. So again, we've talked about this. Crosswalks do not ensure your safety. You do, okay? So there's some key lessons to be a smart pedestrian. All right, guys, I know teachers like to use these acronyms, and so I'm doing that here too. So a smart pedestrian, okay, S. You need to be seen. Think about, are you visible to drivers? Can drivers see you? And vice versa. You need to make eye contact. Think about when the mornings are dark. Do you have anything reflective on you? When my daughter was young, I would not buy her a backpack unless it had something reflective on it, because I knew she always had her backpack with her. And it just gave her that little bit of extra protection that if she was out in the early morning when it was dark, that cars would be more likely to see her. Think about sunrise and sunset when the sun is really low in the sky. Some drivers are actually sort of blinded. It's very hard to see. So when you're crossing in a crosswalk and you can see that sun is really low in the sky, think about that you may almost be completely shadowed. And a car may not see you. And they can't yield to you if they can't see you. So, and also use body language that shows that you want to cross the street. Again, don't be Buddy the Elf, but be the good pedestrian that's paying attention. Be mindful. There's been a lot of information we've talked about here today, but be cautious. Use your head. Think about what you need to look out for. Do you know the extra precautions you need to take if you're riding a bike? Again, slow down when you're interacting with other pedestrians or when you're crossing the street. And learning to understand if you have enough time to cross the street, depending on the length of the crossing and the speed that cars are coming at you at. Be alert. Pay attention, guys. Unplug when you're crossing the street, when you're interacting with cars. Can you hear? If you've got headphones in, you may not be able to hear, and that's a great, you really need to be able to pay attention to the sounds of cars coming. Can you see? Are you distracted? Distractions might come from your friends. You're screwing around, maybe not paying attention. That's fine to be with your friends and to hang out with them, but when you're crossing the street, you really need to pay attention to what's going on around you. And please stay off your phones when you're crossing the street, when you're approaching the street. The number one reason that parents give as why they give their a young child, a cell phone is to keep them safe. But in reality, that's the one thing that might make you less safe. So please stay off your phones. And be responsible. Only you can be responsible for you. You need to use good judgment. Show your parents that you can be responsible and teach them. Many of them may not know some of these rules. And ultimately, this knowledge that you're learning here now and experiencing as a 5th grader, 6th grade, 7th, 8th, this will help you later when you become a driver. And lastly, don't be overconfident in a crosswalk. I know I've taught you a lot of information here, things to think about ways to have magical powers, which is great. I'm a very confident pedestrian myself. but there's a difference between being right and being dead. So you may have a right in a crosswalk, but don't be stupid and say, well, I'm right, I can cross here, but not pay attention to the cars around you. And lastly, try it out. Practice with your parents first when it's not busy. So go out. I mean, especially now that there's a lot less traffic on the streets with COVID-19 going on. A lot of people are not driving to work, so it's not as busy. So go out now, practice with your parents when it is busy then, and then prove to them that you're responsible. And then when they are ready for you to be on your own and you are ready, do it with confidence. Be a smart pedestrian. All right, so I'm going to end here today, guys, with this great little video. Again, I believe in roundabouts because they slow vehicle speeds. They manage traffic at a much slower speed, and they make our communities more livable with traffic. And if these ducks can do it, I know that, or these geese can do it, I know you can do it too. All right, guys, thank you so much. I hope that some of this information has been helpful and meaningful to you. I hope that you share some of this information with your parents and you get out there, enjoy the weather, take care, be safe, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.